What's going on, guys? As many of you know, one of my favorite books in personal development is Think and Grow Rich. That book was catalyzed as a result of Napoleon Hill, the author, meeting Andrew Carnegie, who was the wealthiest man in the world at the time. Carnegie basically charged Napoleon Hill with interviewing a number of successful people, almost 200 people, and extracting the principles that allowed them to do their life's work. And so I wanted to delve into the life of Carnegie himself, how he rose to power, because he came from incredibly humble beginnings. Carnegie was the son of a failed linen weaver. He immigrated from Europe and only with a year or two of schooling went from being a factory worker, like a factory boy at the age of 13, to becoming a telegraph operator, to running a railway station, a railroad operating system, and then eventually becoming a steel magnate. I extracted these principles from his book, The Autobiography of Andrew Carnegie, as well as a number of speeches that he had given in various settings. And so the first principle is this: do not be constrained by your present reality. Always feel the future in the instant. One of my favorite phrases on making shit happen, bringing to life the things that are within you, the ideas that are within you, comes from Lady Macbeth, who is perhaps one of Shakespeare's most power-hungry female characters. At one point very early on in the play, Lady Macbeth is having a conversation and she says, "Thy letters have transported me beyond the ignorant present, and I feel now the future in the instant." And I think if there's one principle that Carnegie embodied incredibly well very early on in his life when he had nothing going for him, it's this idea of feeling a future, of greatness, of success, of the coming of good tidings in his life while he lived in an instant, in a present reality that was actually very constraining. He did this out of desperation. At the age of 13, he was working in a factory for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, making 20 cents each day. He actually admitted in his writings that he felt very, very stressed in those times. He suffered from a lot of anxiety, and yet he held on to the belief that something good was around the corner, and he kept his eyes peeled for any opportunity to bring progress into his life. He says this in his book: "My hopes were high, and I looked every day for some change to take place. What it was to be, I knew not, but that it would come, I felt certain if I kept on." This idea of feeling the future in the instant has also been touted by a number of modern day successful people, one of which was Conor McGregor. McGregor had left his job as a plumber. He had this very safe but terrible job in plumbing, and he left it to pursue MMA. And even when he had nothing, when nothing was going right in his life, in fact, Conor McGregor's present day reality was incredibly stressful, he maintained this visualization that one day he would be a recognized figure in the MMA world. The second principle is jump at the chance to take on more responsibility. One day, as Andrew Carnegie was working as that factory boy, his employer asked him to make out some bills because he didn't have a clerk. And Andrew jumped on that task like a person who was given a grenade with the pin open. He worked voraciously and he finished those bills aggressively, early, and well. And every time his employer had some odd work, some odd jobs for anyone to do, Andrew always jumped at the chance to take on that additional responsibility. And this allowed him to be promoted from being a factory boy to becoming a messenger person at a telegraph operating company, which was a huge step up. Brian Tracy, another one of my favorite authors, mentions this principle in almost every book he's written. In his book Goals, he says this: "As soon as you get settled in at your new job and you are on top of your work, go to your boss and tell him or her that you want more responsibility. Tell him or her you are determined to make the maximum contribution possible in this organization and that you would very much like more responsibility whenever it becomes available." When I first started doing this as a young executive with a large corporation, my boss nodded and smiled and thanked me for my interest. Every few days I would report to my boss and mention in parting that I wanted more responsibility. After a few weeks of this, my boss gave me a project to study and evaluate. I jumped on it like a dog jumping on a bone and ran off. I worked day and night and throughout the weekend, tearing that project apart, gathering research, reassembling the details, and putting together a report and a proposal. On Monday morning, I was back to my boss with a complete proposal on the project. He was obviously surprised. He said there was no rush. I didn't expect anything back from you for a week or two. I thanked him for his concern and told him that this project evaluation is complete, as you requested, and by the way, I would really like more responsibility. In no time, I began moving up the organization. So there are two components to the second principle. The first is actually the willingness to take on more responsibility, but the second is having that willingness to act incredibly fast and to finish that additional work as quickly and as well as you can. Carnegie embodied both aspects of this principle very well. In fact, when he was hired on as that messenger, he offered to start working immediately when he finished the interview process. The interview was successful. I took care to explain that I did not know Pittsburgh, that perhaps I would not be strong enough, but all I wanted was a trail. He asked me how soon I could come, and I said I could stay now if wanted. And looking back over the circumstance, I think that answer might well be pondered by young men. It is a great mistake not to seize opportunity. I felt that my foot was upon the ladder and that I was bound to climb. The third success principle that Andrew Carnegie embodied incredibly well over the course of his entire life is this idea of continuously developing your skills. When Andrew Carnegie was first asked to do that billing work, to fill out that bookkeeping for the first time when he was still a factory boy, he actually went out on his own and solicited the help of someone who could help him become the best in bookkeeping, to do something called double entry bookkeeping, which is why his employer reached out to him every time he wanted some odd work done. And when Andrew Carnegie finally got promoted to being a messenger boy at that telegraph company, he would come in early to sweep the floors, and he realized that the telegraphs weren't being used at the time, and so he worked with his peers to learn those telegraph machines. Having to sweep out the operating rooms in the mornings, the boys had an opportunity of practicing upon the telegraph instruments before the operators arrived. This was a new chance. Whenever one learns to do anything, he has never to wait long for an opportunity of putting his knowledge to use. In those early mornings, after Carnegie finished sweeping up, he learned to do telegraphy so well that after a year he was asked to be the personal telegraph operator for Thomas A. Scott, who was the head of a railroad division in Pennsylvania. The fourth principle of success that Andrew Carnegie touted in his works is kind of badass and very aggressive. It's definitely something I haven't embodied in my own life, but it's this idea that in the absence of orders, assume the role of the boss. Basically, in the absence of the superintendent of the railroad company, in the absence of his boss, Carnegie pretended he was the boss, as if the railroad company actually belonged to him. I guess this is another example of feeling the future in the instant, because he eventually did head the railroad company, but he also backed up this notion, this feeling, with an insane amount of research and work. He learned more about the company and the business than even his bosses, and so he assumed a certain bravado. He acted exceptionally, and over 5 years, by the time he was 24 years old, he actually was heading a Pittsburgh railroad company. The question now is how to rise from the subordinate position. I can give you the secret. It lies mainly in this. Instead of the question, what must I do for my employer, substitute, what can I do? The rising man must do something exceptional and beyond the range of his special department. He must attract attention. You will never be a partner unless you know the business of your department far better than the owners possibly can. When called to account for your independent action, show the boss the result of your genius and tell him that you knew it would be so. And the final principle that I'll address in this video is this idea of concentration. Concentration is the master skill. Concentration, whether it's feeling the future in the instant, developing your skills, assuming more responsibility and acting voraciously in the accomplishment of those tasks, or even in the bravado of treating yourself as the CEO of a company that you are just an employee at. Growing in any field requires insane concentration, and Carnegie and a number of other successful people attribute so much of what they accomplish to their ability to focus deeply on one task at a time and stay with it. Concentration is my motto. First honesty, then industry, then concentration. Concentrate all your thought and energy upon the performance of your duties. Put all your eggs into one basket and then watch that basket. Do not scatter your shot. The man who is director in half dozen railroads and 3 or 4 manufacturing companies, who tries at one and the same time to work a farm, a factory, a line of streetcars, a political party, and a store, rarely amounts to much. He may be concerned in the management of more than one business enterprise, but they should all be of one kind, of which he understands. The great successes of life are made by concentration. This idea of working with complete concentration is not only touted by capitalistic Western thinking, people who have found a lot of material success, but also in a lot of esoteric traditions. This is one of the reasons why meditation was given such an importance, because it helps build concentration so much. And progress even on the spiritual planes requires a degree of insane concentration. And so the interesting thing about this is that it compounds over time. Concentration in one thing leads to the next thing and the next thing. And so eventually, objectives that start out sequential and incremental snowball into bigger and bigger effects. In the book, The One Thing, author Gary Keller says this: extraordinary success is sequential, not simultaneous. What starts out linear becomes geometric. You do the right thing and then you do the next right thing. Over time it adds up and the geometric potential of success is unleashed. The domino effect applies to the big picture, like your work or your business, and it applies to the smallest moment in each day when you're trying to decide what to do next. Success builds on success, and as this happens over and over, you move towards the highest success possible. This is how Carnegie rose to such great heights. As someone with little education, literally just a poor immigrant boy with no education and working 12 hours a day in a factory setting, he found those incremental gains. And those incremental gains eventually became geometric. They compounded. They had an exponential result after a period of time. Andrew's rise from a factory worker to a messenger boy was an incremental gain. From messenger boy to telegraph operator was a slightly greater leap, but still not an enormous leap in his success. But his rise from being a telegraph operator to actually running a railway company was a huge leap. And his continuous work in these directions in terms of developing his skills, taking on responsibility, and feeling the future in the instant eventually allowed him to become a steel tycoon and a magnate. That's it for this video. Hope you guys liked it. And for those of us who are willing to feel the future in the instant, work on our skills, find those incremental gains, assume additional responsibility, and work with incredible concentration, to us I say, greatness is coming. Till next time, guys.